Hello everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. It feels like forever since I've sat down to film one of these. I know it hasn't actually been that long, but the last 2-3 weeks or so have just been one super busy blur. I was traveling, I went out of the country for a little while, and then I went over to the East Coast and the Midwest to visit my family members. We did a lot of like wedding planning stuff while we were back home in Florida visiting family, and I just feel a little bit lost in time and space. But I thought that I would go ahead and sit down today, and I want to make a video that is like an August, September reading wrap up, since we are getting really close to the end of the month. And because I didn't really read a whole lot in either of those months, I guess I just wanted to check in with you guys, let you know some of the things I've been reading and what I've been thinking about them. So, without further ado, we can go ahead and get started at the top of the order, which is actually with the Booktubeathon. Again, feels like that was forever ago. It wasn't really that long ago, but I just feel very, as I said, distant, like that happened to somebody else long ago. So we have a few books that I read and really enjoyed for the Booktubeathon. The first one was 1,000 Beginnings and Endings, which is a short story collection edited by Ellen O. and Elsie Chapman. It is 15 retellings of Asian myths and legends, and I really did enjoy this book. It's great if you're interested in short stories, if you're interested in retellings of mythology, and it's got a really like star-studded list of authors. Really good, highly recommend. I read 2 novels as well. The first one of those was Who is Vera Kelly by Rosalie Knecht. And I picked this up because I heard that it was about a queer woman who was living in New York City in the 1950s. And it turned out to be like the most wonderful, low-key, but super intense spy story I've read in a really long time. I used to be super into spy stories. I went through this like phase where I was reading pretty much nothing but spy and like secret agency type stories, and then I kind of fell off of it. But it's definitely like a genre that has a lot of sort of comforting beats for me, so I did really enjoy this book as well. It's about Vera Kelly, you know, the eponymous character, and her time as a undercover CIA agent in Argentina during the time of the Falkland War, and kind of her relationship to both the Argentinians that she is living with and befriends, and also like her conflicting loyalties to herself and the United States government and various other organizations that are kind of vying for her loyalty. It had a very surprising ending that I did not see coming at all, and this was really good. And then a book that I think is going to be in the like contenders for best books of 2018 for sure is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This book doesn't really need any introduction. It came out last year. I know people have been loving it. People have been raving about it. My really good friend Dahlia asked me to read it, and so I did. It's so wonderful. It starts out, you think it's just basically going to be a story about these like whiny middle-class people and like their middle-class problems, but it turns into something completely different as you read it, because the family gets visited by this woman and her daughter. You know, it's like a single mother that comes to live with the family and basically like be an artist in their little carriage house, and also kind of be their cleaner and cooking lady and stuff like that. But she really just brings such a different perspective to this like Shaker Heights, Ohio, very like privileged, very white community. And then there's a whole thing that goes down with a white couple in the neighborhood that are trying to adopt a baby of Chinese American heritage, and there's all this discussion and debate among the characters, but also that the book provokes in the reader to think about like what are these sort of like racial and cultural implications of cross-racial, cross-cultural adoption. What do we owe it to each other in order to make sure that, you know, we raise children in the best way that we possibly can, and what does that look like if you are not of the same sort of like cultural background as the child that you are adopting. I really loved this book. Can't recommend it highly enough. Thank you very much, Dahlia, and everybody else that recommended that I read this. Okay, got a couple other physical books, and then we can get into some ebooks that I also read. So this next book I heard about on one of the Book Riot All the Books podcasts, and it's called I Can't Date Jesus, Love, Sex, Family, Race, and Other Reasons I've Put My Faith in Beyonce by Michael Arsenault. This book is a memoir about a black man sort of coming of age as a queer black man in the southern United States. It's told as a series of sort of loosely connected essays that go between like his memories of his childhood and the types of models of, black masculinity that he was taught to emulate growing up, his sort of coming of age at Howard University as a young black man trying to come to terms with his sexuality and feel his way through very fraught relationships with other men and friendships and things like that. This was a really good book. It was very short. It was very kind of easy to pick up and put down due to the disconnected nature of the chapters, and I'd recommend it if you're interested in things like queer autobiography, memoir, conceptions of, the self and gender performance, gender identity, and also sexuality. Then I also read a graphic novel. I guess this was technically supposed to be for the Booktubeathon, but I don't think I made it to reading that. And that was Brazen Rebel Ladies Who Rocked the World by Penelope Bagiu. Picked up this book at Emerald City Comic Con, and it's pretty much exactly how it sounds. It is a beautifully drawn, well-written stories of many different women throughout history with more of a slant towards women from French and French-speaking cultures, as the author is French, so she writes a lot about women that come from either France or places that were colonized by the French and now speak French and have that sort of cultural influence there. I did enjoy this book. I did think that it was a little bit shallow at times in terms of the biographies of the women, and I do wish that the author had included like a bibliography at the end, because I really wanted to learn more about some of these figures that I didn't know about previously, and that just would have been nice. I think a lot of times, even though this is, I think, marketed as like a young adult or a middle grade nonfiction book, usually the author does include some type of bibliography. So I was a little disappointed that that wasn't actually in there. But anyways, this was a beautiful book. I think it would make a great gift for anybody that you know that is just looking to learn a little bit more about incredible women in history. I have one more novel here before we get into the sort of ebooks and month of September. And this was recommended to me by my friend Varshita, and it is called The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. So this year has kind of been the year where I end up trying to read like more romance stories than I usually do. Usually that's like not a genre that I enjoy or gravitate towards at all, but for some reason this year has been like a really good year in terms of romance. I really enjoyed reading The Kiss Quotient earlier this year. There's a couple other titles that I know I really liked that I'm blanking on, that if they're not quite romances have very like strong romantic components. And this is the sort of classic rivals to lovers scenario. The two people, Lucy and Josh, meet each other at work, and they kind of have this bickering rivalry because they have like a lot of attraction between themselves that they can't really seem to resolve in any other way except fighting. And aside from, the obvious, it's not really a great idea in real life to date people that you work with because reasons, it can go super horribly wrong. This was great as a book, though. It was just steamy in all of the right places. I actually was kind of a little upset that I was reading it in public a couple times because I was like, man, do I really need to be reading this out on a park bench? People will see me like, I'm blushing, I'm sweating. So good. I'm excited that this author, this is her first novel, and she has a second book coming out early next year. I don't remember what the title is. I will try and remember to put that in the description box if I can find that out. Okay, and then I saved which of my books were ebooks on my phone. I read Neurotribes, The Legacy of Autism and the Future of Neurodiversity by Steve Silberman, which is a really long, really exhaustive book about the sort of history, both in terms of like the medical model, the social model of disability of autism, Asperger's syndrome, and neurodivergence more generally, but specifically the things that have traditionally been part of the autism Asperger's diagnosis. It goes through the history of that, the rise of the like autistic self-advocacy movement, the movement away from basically treating any children that were born with autistic traits as basically like criminally insane and having to just be put away in these basically glorified jails, where they would never have the access to an education or any type of therapeutic input. The book was really interesting. I learned a lot from it. I will say, though, that unless you're like really, really interested in the subject, you're likely to get bogged down by a lot of unnecessary details. I really enjoyed that. I liked being able to saturate myself in a bunch of details that a lot of people might overlook or that you might not be aware of if this isn't something that you're interested in. But if that's really not your cup of tea, maybe skip this book, read a different thing. Okay, second ebook that I read. Oh yeah, Lumberjanes Volume 9. Surprising no one. I really enjoyed that. Didn't read that as an ebook though. Second ebook that I read was The Botany of Desire, A Plant's Eye View of the World by Michael Pollan. I think I got this because it was like a Kindle deal or something like that, and it looked really interesting. And basically Michael Pollan is like this chef and food scientist and in a way like cultural anthropologist of food that decided to talk about how humans, yes, have shaped sort of like plants and our relationship to plants through things like agriculture, foraging. Pretty much ever since there have been humans, we have shaped, our culture around relationship to plants. But he takes the thesis of what if it's plants that have sort of naturally selected for us as much as we have naturally selected for them. And he does this by going through a few of the different sort of human appetites as typified by certain plants. So for instance, he goes through the history of like the potato and humanity's relationship to the potato as an example of humankind's like desire for control over the natural world, desire to be able to do things like control a food supply down to the very genetic code of the potato itself. He has this whole episode where he decides that he's going to plant just his regular potato plants in his garden, and then he's going to plant the ones from Monsanto, which is a company that like specifically genetically edits for certain specific traits down to each individual little nucleotide, and his experience doing that. He also has chapters about cannabis, about apples, the history of apples, and about tulips. So all very fascinating, very interesting. I did think that one of the things that annoyed me about this book was that it just kind of veers into the non-scientific and speculative sometimes. And for a book that kind of posits itself as being a more scientific researched nonfiction book, I thought that was just a little bit weird. It kind of took me out of my enjoyment of the book because I was like, now wait a second, this is just kind of a fanciful flight that he goes off on. But the thesis was really interesting, and I thought that it was well written. I thought that the authorial voice was really enjoyable to read. And then the last few books, let's see, hold that thought. I actually ended up rereading an old favorite of mine from childhood, and that is Redwall by Brian Jakes. If you grew up in, the 80s, 90s, you're probably already aware of these books, but just in case you're not, it's basically like a mythic cycle of fantasy novels that are written for like children, like a middle grade audience, that tells the story of these mice and other woodland creatures, peaceful woodland creatures that live in Redwall Abbey. It's not like an overtly Christian or religious tale, it's just like that they just live in an abbey and they're like an order of mice that try to care for other creatures and to be like peaceful forces for good. And this is the first book that's in the series, so Redwall Abbey is under attack by an evil rat called Clooney the Scourge and his horde of like rats and weasels and other sort of conniving, nasty rodents that want to just destroy anybody that loves peace and happiness. And it follows the story of a young mouse named Matthias who just wants to be a warrior. He's a novice in the order, but he believes that the best way that he can be a force for good in the world is to stand up and fight against injustice. So he wants to follow in the footsteps of the great mouse hero, Martin the Warrior. There's like a whole wonderful sequence about Matthias trying to find the sword of Martin the Warrior so that he can basically like lead the animals of Redwall Abbey to victory against the rats and their just utter lawlessness. This book is totally charming. It definitely holds up. Even if some of the plot is a little bit predictable at times, I remember just being so enthralled by this as a kid. And it's predictable, but it's written in such a way that you don't really mind, that you know what's going to happen. Especially like reading it as an adult, it's still just a great adventure story. The characters' voices are just so wonderfully specific, Brian Jacques' description of food in particular is another thing that this series is famous for. And I really was just warmed by being able to return to this favorite from when I was a little kid. And then finally, I have 2 books that I read that were just, so amazing. Didn't come out in 2018, so maybe they'll be on the best books. We'll see. It depends on how many books that actually came out in 2018 that I like. But that was Nevernight and God's Grave, both by Jay Kristoff, which are the first 2 books in the Nevernight Chronicles. I believe the 3rd one is set to come out early next year, something like that. Anyway, I hope it's soon because I really can't wait for more of this world. It is a really... Well, let me go ahead and tell you who the main character is and give you a little information about that. So the main character is a girl named Mia Corvaray, whose entire family was basically assassinated, imprisoned, murdered, etc. during a bloody coup in the country where she lives. And she's vowed that she's going to get revenge for her murdered family. So she decides that she wants to become an assassin trained by the Red Church. The Red Church is this sort of shadowy organization of assassins that has a secret initiation process, and they basically will train young people to become assassins and then hire them out to do different contracts. They basically will take anybody as long as they can pay, and there's, very little honor among assassins as well as thieves, as you might imagine. So Mia's main sort of thing that she's trying to deal with there is how much of herself does she want to sacrifice in pursuit of revenge for her family. That's a constant theme that keeps coming up during the book. And another thing too is that Mia is also what they call Darken in this world, and it basically means that... Sorry, my laundry's going off. It basically means that you have a shadowy figure that follows behind you. Basically your shadow takes the form of some type of animal that feeds on fear. It feeds on your fear, the fear of others, basically allowing you to be literally fearless and perform these superhuman feats that you couldn't do if you were hampered by the ordinary emotion of fear. It also comes along with a bunch of other really cool abilities that she has, like the ability to pretty much pass without a trace because she can wrap herself in shadows. Downside of that is that she can't see because she's cloaked in literal darkness. And then also being able to walk between someone else's shadow and a shadow in a different location. So some limited teleportation. What I really like about this book is that it sets up with a very simple premise, right? Girl wants to become an assassin to get revenge. And then it takes the characters and their motivations and pushes them up against obstacles that you would expect them to come up against, but they respond to it in such different ways than you'd expect. Basically, it takes the characters' greatest strengths and forces them to have to confront the shortcomings of those strengths, the blind spots that the characters have, and the difficulty that they have in trying to make whatever is the moral choice, the right choice for that character. And don't get me wrong, this book is violent as hell. It's dark as hell. Don't read it if you're sensitive to all of these sort of rape, murder, stabbing, blood kind of thing. Although I like the stabbing. I like the stabbing a lot. Yes, I know stabbing is wrong, but it's also stabbing. So I really think that this book does a wonderful job of drawing its characters, and that's very rare in fantasy books. In the best fantasy books, of course, it exists, but I am just so looking forward to the third book. It appears my camera is about to die, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. That way you'll be sure to get updates whenever I post a new video. And do leave a comment in the comments section down below if you're interested in talking about any of these books. I know you all are. You're such a wonderful, interactive group of people, so I can't wait to see what you think about this. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.